Okay, I think we are live. That seems to be all good. If anyone in the chat could let me know if they can hear me. I think actually I can preview that on here, which would be good. Yep, there's audio, that's good to know. Cool, so welcome back to another RideTo Riders Club live stream. Today we're going to be doing some more maintenance activities down here at BikeSmart, joined with Peter today. And we're going to be covering the ignition side of motorbike maintenance.
Yeah, just basic maintenance. Also, it would be covering how the ignition system works, so just a basic understanding of what you're looking at.
Yeah, like your core components, how it all works, and what you may need to look for if you're having issues with it. So at any point in the stream, just drop us messages as we go along and we will be happy to help you. So it can be anything from ignition to just bike maintenance, so just let us know really. So without further ado, let's get into it. So Peter, do you want to walk us through the ignition components?
Sure. Right, so what we're talking about is not the ignition switch, the key that turns the ignition on and off. We're talking about the ignition system, what actually makes the engine work. So to give you a basic understanding of what you're looking at, it helps if you understand how your engine works. There's a thing called the golden triangle, and that's made up of fuel, compression, and ignition. So the ignition is one of those three key elements. So if you have fuel getting into the engine and you have compression, then the ignition is the bit that actually ignites the fuel. And the way it does that is through a very simple means of converting the 12 volts of your bike's battery into a very high voltage, typically 20 to 30,000 volts, so that that voltage can jump across a gap, creating a spark. That spark is what ignites the fuel. That's what gives you the combustion. That's what provides the energy to turn your engine. So those are the three key elements we're looking at. So we're only going to focus on the ignition system this evening. So what are the key parts of the ignition system? What we have here is a coil. It's the HT coil, as it's called. It's a very common piece of equipment. You have them in all sorts of machinery. You've even got them in your phones on very small levels. And all this coil does is it steps up voltage from one voltage to another. And the way it does that is, on this particular one, it's a 12-volt system off the bike. So you have 12 volts going in through there. And inside here, you've got thousands of windings, very fine copper windings. And then it goes out of here to earth, so that completes the circuit. And what you have there is lots more windings around that through a metal core. And what that does, it steps up the voltage from 12 volts to about 20-odd thousand volts the other side. That then goes through this lead, which is the HT lead, and goes to a cap which fits over your spark plug. So that's your typical spark plug cap. And here we have a spark plug. And you'll see that it's got a threaded end to it, and that's what locates onto the spark plug cap. So it's very important that when you put the cap on, you hear it engaging. You've got a nice click, so it's a very firm connection. So following on, you've got your 20-odd thousand volts going through here onto the cap. The voltage then goes through the spark plug and then just jumps across that little gap there. You can see it's quite a tiny little gap, typically about sort of 25 thousandths of an inch, so it's about 0.9 of a mil. So it's not very big at all, but it's critical that you have the right spark plug gap. So if you're going to look at the spark plugs on your own bike, have a look at your owner's manual and see what the recommended gap is and check it with a feeler gauge or a spark plug measuring tool so you've got the right gap. Reason why that's really important is because if the gap is too big, then the voltage can't jump across easily, or it won't jump across at all. So you'll either get a very weak spark or no spark at all. If the gap is too close, too small, then what you'll have, do you know, I thought that was somebody knocking on the door. No, it's not. It's a ghost. Yeah, we're haunted. Well, as long as the ghost doesn't actually criticise my tuition. So they have an opinion. Right, so if the gap is too small, then the voltage can jump across too easily. So you'll get either no spark or just a very small spark, not enough to ignite the fuel air mixture. So the correct gap is very important. So that's the system, and then every time it comes around to the compression cycle, the bike's computer knows when to tell the system to spark. It generates that spark, powers the engine, and it does it every 4 cycles. It's a 4-stroke engine, or it's, if you've got a 2-stroke bike, every 2nd cycle. But that's how that works. So that's the theory. So what are you going to see in practice? So if you're going to look at replacing a spark plug on your own bike, the very first thing you need to do is look at your owner's manual and make sure you get the right spark plug. And the reason why I say that is because if you put the wrong spark plug into your bike, all sorts of nasty things are going to happen. So the first thing you do is check you've got the right spark plug, and you can see on here there's a part number, and the part number is CR6 BHS. So it's a series of letters and numbers. Make sure that whichever spark plug you get is the right one for your bike, and you'll check that in your owner's manual. The reason why it's so important is because that code tells you exactly what this spark plug is. It tells you how long that threaded area is, it tells you what the diameter is, also it tells you what the heat range is as well, and I'll cover all those 3 points. So why do you suppose it's critical that that thread is the right length?
Well, it won't thread in otherwise, will it?
If it's the wrong diameter, it won't thread in. It'll either just fall in or not screw in at all.
Or if it's too close or too far.
Yep, so if that threaded area is too long, the danger is that the spark plug's going to hit the piston. As the piston comes up, there's a very small gap between the top of the piston and the spark plug. There needs to be a very small gap because that's where the combustible mix is. If the spark plug is nowhere near that combustible mix, it's not going to ignite it. So the spark plug comes very close to that piston. If you put the wrong spark plug in, it's too long, the danger is as the piston comes up, it's going to hit the spark plug. At the very least, it's going to damage the spark plug. Worst case scenario, it's going to punch a hole in at the top of your piston. That's a very expensive repair. If the threaded area is too short, then the problem you have is that the spark plug gap is too far away from the combustible mix. So you'll either get weak combustion or none at all. So very important you have the right length. The right diameter, well, speaks for itself. If it's the wrong diameter, it's just not going to screw in at all. And I mentioned that it also has a heat rating. The whole point of these spark plugs being self-cleaning, and the reason why they can last 20,000 miles between replacements, is because they are maintenance free. They look after themselves. And the way they do that is when the engine's cold, it runs a very rich mixture. The plugs can foul up and get carbon deposits on them. If those carbon deposits accumulate, then it will prevent the plug from working. The plug, once it gets up to its working temperature, burns off those carbon deposits. It cleans itself. I think you've got some very clever self-cleaning ovens these days. They do the same thing. So it burns off the deposits, allows the plug to just carry on working for, let's say, 15, 20,000 miles, which is a hell of a long time for a spark plug to work between replacement. If the heat range is wrong, so if the plug is a cold plug compared to the one you need, it's going to get to its working temperature too soon and it'll overheat. It'll get hot, it can deteriorate. If it's a hot plug, hotter than you need, it won't get up to that working temperature, so it won't clean itself effectively. So make sure you use the right plug, and the way you can tell it's the right plug is it actually tells you. So very simple. Make sure that code is the right one for your bike. Okay, so that's spark plug replacement. As part of routine maintenance, why not take the plug out, have a look, make sure it's healthy. And to do that, we'll have a look at this particular bike and we'll show you how the plug comes out.
Now, I've got a question about spark plugs. Do they come pre-gapped?
Yes.
All of them?
Yes, they do.
You don't need to check them? Or?
You should check them, but they do come pre-gapped, but it wouldn't do any harm to check them, especially if your particular bike has an unusual setting. They're a fairly standard size these days. Back in the good old days when I first started riding, we used to gap our own plugs because there wasn't a standard setting. So you used to have to know what the correct gap was for yours. Mine was a fag paper rolled over twice.
So you didn't need to use a feeler gauge, just the paper.
Oh, couldn't afford feeler gauges then. It was used to smoke Rothmans and had the silver foil inside the packet. Fold that foil over twice. That was a 25 thou gap. That was exactly what I needed for my bikes.
Perfect.
Meant I had to smoke, but there you go. Okay, so if we come around to this side of the bike. So what we're looking at here is, I showed you the HT lead. Well, there it is there. So the coil that we looked at earlier is just up here somewhere. So that's the HT lead. There's the cap there. So pull the cap up, and can you hear that? I don't know if you can pick that up on your sound.
Yeah, should be able to hear that.
So that's the threaded area there, engaging with the spark plug cap. So put the cap to one side. Make sure you have the right size socket. A lot of bikes have these as part of the bike's toolkit. You have a plug spanner. If not, make sure you get the right one for your bike. Push it in. Support the ratchet so you're not twisting. So hold it straight, because there is a chance you could damage the spark plug if you try and pull, especially if it slips. So hold the head of the ratchet steady and then just rotate it anti-clockwise. Spark plugs shouldn't be done up too tight. A lot of people over tighten them. Refer to your owner's manual. It will give you a torque setting. If you don't have a torque setting, the spark plug manufacturers recommend that you tighten it finger tight and then another half a turn. It really is not very much at all. All you're doing is crushing that crush washer there. It's an aluminium washer that's designed to crush down and seal. So it doesn't take much effort at all. You're not really wrench it round. You're more likely to damage it if you do that. So not very tight at all. Just check the torque settings. So this is the one that we've just taken out of this bike here. If you have a look at the spark plug, that's reasonably healthy for this bike. You can see that it's got a little bit of carbon build-up around the outside, simply because it's a school bike and it hasn't had a chance to have a good long run. So it doesn't often get up to its full working temperature. If we were to take this bike for a nice long run, that carbon deposit would burn off. The important part is the centre. If you have a look, the centre, the insulator, is a nice sort of straw colour, sort of light buff colour. That's fairly healthy. You can tell a lot about the health of your bike engine by looking at the spark plug and what it looks like. If it was black and sooty, so like a matte black colour, that tells you it's running too rich. So there's too much fuel going through the engine. That can happen quite often if you only do very short hops. I mean, we get customers that commute to a train station here in Hayward Heath, and their typical commute is like half a mile from home to the station and then back again. The bike never gets to warm up, the plug never gets to its working temperature, so every time they're running it, the bike's running cold, it's using way too much fuel because it's running on fast idle or on choke. So over time, it just gets black and sooty, so it's that matte black colour. If it was black and oily, so if it was shiny and oily, that's a bit more concerning. It means that you're burning oil. So either you've got a worn engine and oil's getting past the piston rings or through the valve seats. So either way, oil is getting into the engine, into the combustion chamber, and that's why you've got a black, oily, shiny deposit on there. So that gives you a bit of concern. If it was a very pale colour, almost white, then it's running too hot. And the reason why it would run too hot is because the engine's running too lean. And what I mean by that is the fuel-air mixture is wrong. The ideal mixture is 14.7 to 1, so 14.7 parts of air to 1 part of fuel. That's the optimum mix, and the engine tries to give you that. That's the optimum mix at working temperature. When the bike's cold, it needs a richer mix. It needs less than 14.7 to 1. It needs probably 10 to 1. But that's too rich for when it gets up to its working temperature. So to begin with, when the bike's cold, you're using more fuel, and that in turn means you're more likely to carbon up. But if it's a really pale straw colour, almost white, that shows that it's gone beyond 14.7 to 1. It's maybe 16, 17 to 1. Way too lean. The downside of that is not that you've got better fuel efficiency, it's the engine's running much hotter if it runs lean. you've got more chance of actually burning things out. In extreme cases, spark plugs can melt if they get too hot. So looking at your spark plug will actually give you a very good indication of this bike's health. If you have a Haynes manual, most Haynes manuals have what's called a colour chart in the back of the manual, and you have about 8 or 10 photographs of these spark plugs in different states, and you can compare your spark plug to the colour chart to see exactly what you're looking at. It's a very useful resource, and obviously it's online as well. Okay, so what we would normally do if we're going to put the same spark plug back in, so as I mentioned earlier, they're good for 15, 20,000 miles. Your owner's manual will tell you what the interval is between replacement of spark plugs. So if it's between replacement intervals, then what you do is you'd get a soft brush, like a copper brush, give it a clean up, get rid of any deposits, and then just re-gap it again with a feeler gauge to the right gauge. And that's it. And then put it back in again.
Simple.
So very important when you go to put it back in again, people do get this wrong. So it's very important. You don't use the ratchet to put it back in again. Only do it with your fingertips, because you've got very often an aluminium head, steel thread on the spark plug. It's very easy to cross thread it. And what I mean by that is you're not putting the spark plug in square to the thread. You put it in a bit sideways. It's easier to catch the thread, and if you're not careful, it will start cutting its own thread. And if you're a bit ham-fisted and you think, oh, it's a bit stiff, I'm going to just keep forcing it, or even worse, use the ratchet because you can't feel what you're doing, it's very easy to cross thread. And if you do that, and if you're persistent enough, which a lot of people are, you will wreck your cylinder head, and then you're in for a very expensive repair. So if it doesn't wind in easily, then try again. Don't just try and force it. And if it helps, get a bit of copper grease. Just put a little smear of copper grease on there, because that's a high temperature grease that's designed for coating spark plug threads. It won't do any harm, and it'll actually help with anti-seizing as well. But just put the spark plug. You can see the spark plug thread there. Mm-hmm. So just put the spark plug, just offer it up nice and gently. Don't bang it in, because you're going to affect the gap. So just be careful, just put it back in, and then just literally with your fingertips, just give it a little wobble, and it should wind in quite easily just with your fingertips. Once you've wound it in several turns, then you can use the ratchet, because you know that it's correctly threaded and it's going to go all the way in.
And with that socket where you've taken it off, you said it's a specialist one for spark plugs. Mm-hmm. Could you use any, or is that one needed?
It needs to be a long reach plug, so it needs to be long enough to actually get past the insulator and onto the actual hexagonal head on the spark plug. Mm-hmm. And a proper spark plug socket will also have a rubber tube inside it, and what that rubber tube does is, it's a soft rubber tube, it's like foam. It actually grips the insulator, so that once you've fully unwound it, the spark plug's not going to fall back down the hole. Because sometimes this one's nice and easy because it's an angle, easy to get to, but sometimes the spark plug is almost vertically on top of the head, and once you've unwound it, you can't get your fingers to it, and what happens is it falls out of the socket, and then you've got all sorts of fun and games trying to get it back out again.
Yeah, because this bike here is definitely an easier bike to get to for spark plugs, but some bikes, perhaps like this one here, you're going to have a bit more of an involved process.
As long as you've got a weekend free, because it will take you a weekend to get the spark plugs in that bike. Yes. Yeah. I mean, that's the Honda Pan-European. Actually, it's not so bad, I'm exaggerating, but some bikes, things like inline fours, for example, like Honda CBRs, R1s, R6s, those ones, you've got to take the tank off, the airbox off. You're talking several hours just to get to the spark plugs.
It's a shame I've been looking at them, so.
Well, the good thing is you don't have to replace the spark plugs very often on those.
Yeah.
Okay, so once the spark plug's in, then tighten it to the correct torque setting. I mean, I actually, through experience, I know how tight is tight enough, but if you're fairly new to it, borrow a torque wrench, get the right torque setting so you don't over-tighten it, because that's the other common problem people make. they over tighten because they get it to what should be the correct tension, and they think, oh, that's not quite enough. Anxiety kicks in. You think, I haven't really done it tight enough. So you tighten it just a little bit more just for reassurance, and then you think, well, is that tight enough? And then a bit more, and then it suddenly gets loose. That's because you just stripped the thread. And that's when you're phoning us saying help. So make sure you don't over tighten. Once you've tightened it up, then put the spark plug cap back on, and just make sure that you can feel it engaging fully. And then the final test is, does it work? Well, there you go.
Lovely. Very nice.
So that is pretty much it for the ignition system. Do we have any questions?
Let's have a look, see if anyone's popped anything in. So are some bikes... Oh, we have got some questions.
Good.
I think it's not necessarily directly related to Spark, but we'll go through them. So I have a couple of questions about my Lexmoto Viper 20 plate. The check engine light is on, but when I use the throttle it flickers on and off. What could be the cause? The other question is why the rear brake light would not be lighting up. The original wire was shafted and I replaced it with the exact same wire and it's still not lighting up.
Right, okay. Should we do all those questions one at a time?
Yeah.
So with the Lexmoto, if I understand it rightly, when he or she turns the ignition on, the engine management light comes on, and it stays on, or does it go out?
Oh, I think it seems to flicker on and off.
If it's flickering on and off, that's normally just a dicky sensor. So it'd be a case of getting along to somebody who's got a diagnostics tool for the Lexmoto. It's a little mini computer, you can plug it in, and it will give you a readout of what that fault code is. And it will tell you where the fault is. So if it's flickering on and off and goes off, the bike will store in its memory what that problem was. So even if it's not showing, when you take it along to somebody who's got the diagnostics equipment, they can plug it in, it will bring up the fault code, and it will tell you whether it's a lambda sensor or whether it's a temperature sensor. But it'll be one of the sensors on the bike. It could be just a poor connection. Yeah, the wire connecting the sensor might be a bit dicky. Could be the sensor itself playing up. But the fact that it's flickering and goes on and off suggests that there's nothing really wrong with the bike. It's more a wiring issue or a dicky sensor. Yeah,
and also asking about the brake light not lighting up. I mean, it seems like electrical problems are probably the
electrical
issue.
Problems are the worst possible things you can have on a bike,
Yeah.
Because quite often we get bikes come in for electrical faults, and the customer will say such and such a problem is playing up, and then they'll bring it here and they go, oh, it's working now. It's like, well, okay, well, if it's working, we can't find the fault because there's nothing wrong. We have to wait until it actually stops working, and then we can trace it through and say that's what's not working. But electrical faults are not terrible to deal with. For the brake lights, they're relatively straightforward. Did they say what bike it is?
Still the Lexmoto.
Oh, still a Lexmoto.
Yeah.
Do we know how old the bike is?
5 years old.
Right. Around about 5 years ago, I think they were just moving to LEDs. So we don't know whether it's LED lights or whether it's normal bulbs. If it's the LED lights, they're a bit more tricky to deal with because with LED lights, they either work or they don't. You can't replace them. Also, they don't mention whether the brake lights not working on both the front and rear. If the brake lights work on the front and not the rear, or vice versa, if they work on the rear but not on the front, that indicates there's nothing wrong with the actual light itself because it's lighting up on one of the brakes, but it will be a brake light switch. And the most common one is the front brake light. I might be able to show you here actually. I mean, this is very similar to the Lexmoto. What you have, can you see that wire there? Mm-hmm. You've got two spade connectors there, and inside here is a switch. It's just a little micro switch. So when you apply the brake lever, in fact, if you come around this side, you can actually see the switch. Can you see it switching on and off? Can you see that little button?
Mm-hmm.
That's your switch. So all that happens is when you apply the brake lever, operates that switch, your brake light lights up. They do fail quite regularly. So if that's failed, then you'll have no front brake light, but your rear brake light will still work because it's on a separate switch. So if you have one of the lights working, then it's the switch. If neither of them work, you need to suspect the light unit itself. It's either the bulb or the bulb holder.
Yeah, that's actually a really good tip to like work out. At least isolating it is the way to go. But that's all bike problems, isn't it? So
oh yeah, it's all a process of elimination.
Yeah.
Yeah, you start off with what you think's wrong, and very often you find that it's not what you thought was wrong at all. By the time you've worked your way through, it's actually something else that's causing that problem.
Well, I've just been told the front works, just not the rear.
In that case, again, this is quite similar to his Lex Moto, so we can certainly help there. So if the front brake light is working but the rear isn't, have a look at the rear brake light. You will find the rear brake light switch somewhere around here. So that's the rear brake. And on this particular bike, it's inconveniently hidden behind there. But behind that bracket, you'll have a switch, which is a plunger type switch. And what I mean by that is it's like a small tube with a little metal pin coming out of it and a spring. The spring is attached to your brake lever. So the spring activates the switch. So as you press the rear brake, that spring stretches and it pulls the little pin in the brake light switch. So that's hidden behind here. And on the Lex Moto, it would be very similar. That's the first place I'd look. Have a look at that switch. You might find that it's just got sticky because you get lots of road dirt and muck behind there, and that gums up the switch, and quite often it just corrodes to the point where the spring's not strong enough to activate the switch. And that's what you find is usually the problem.
Yeah, that makes sense.
I'd say 90% sure that's what your problem will be.
Yeah, awesome. That sounds really helpful. So, Craig, I hope that helps you there. I think actually myself on Spark ignition side of stuff. So, what was these guys here? Are they the?
These are the. It's a transformer. It's called an ignition coil, and all it does is it just steps up the 12 volts in that circuit there up to 20,000 volts there. It's quite an old piece of kit. On older, simpler machines like these, like 125s, scooters, typically this is what you'll have. So if you were to actually look in the engine compartment, you will find one of these or something very similar to it. On later bikes, especially larger, more performance machines, they still have the same system, but it looks completely different. What you now have is ignition coil packs, as they call them.
Okay.
And what that is, it's a very long cigar-shaped tube with a connector block on the top. And in the bottom of the tube is the same as you get on the plug cap. And basically what that tube does, it sits on top of the spark plug. Everything is contained, so you don't have a HT lead anymore. You have the coil and the cap all in one unit, so it's sealed. Good thing about that is it's more reliable because there's less to go wrong. The bad side is they're a lot more expensive. They're typically between 90 and 100 pounds each. And if you've got a 4-cylinder bike, you've got 4 of them. Yeah. So, yeah, they're great until they go wrong.
Yeah. Would you say one is better than the other, or is it just
the coil packs are definitely better in the sense that they're self-contained, there's less to go wrong. And they are generally very reliable, but on older machines, once you get to... There was an ER6 kicking around here earlier. Oh well. Once you get to older machines that are sort of 10, 15 years old, quite often they've never been looked at, and the coil packs start to disintegrate. The hard plastic outer coating starts to break down, and once that starts to break down, it exposes all the wires inside it, the transformer. And when that happens, they start to break down.
Yeah, so when was it roughly that sort of switch between them happened, or is it, as you say, for 125s they may still be ignition?
Well, 125s, they will still look very much like this.
Yeah.
Very rarely do you get a 125 with a coil pack. They tend to be on bigger, higher performance machines.
Cool. And I think we've had some follow-up questions from Craig. Very informative. I will take a look. I appreciate it very much. Where are you guys located in case I need to get in touch / bring it to you?
We're in Hayward Heath, so in West Sussex. So specifically about 300 metres from the train station. So very easy to find. You mentioned BikeSmart earlier. We are actually two companies here. BikeSmart is the training school, and it's BikeSmart that runs the maintenance courses. Pan Moto is the workshop and MOT station.
Yeah.
So we're based in the same building, but BikeSmart is the school, Pan Moto is the workshop and MOT station. You can find us online. We're very easy to find.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, no, perfect. Cool. So something I was thinking about where we've recently done a trip which people will be seeing. There's a long, well, yeah, we get on to that video eventually, but we've taken some bikes abroad and we had a breakdown. What would your advice be if you're having a breakdown to work out the problem? Where would you start to look?
Right, well, I think you guys actually did pretty much the right thing.
Yeah.
Although you did forget to reconnect the fuel line. So when we turned the ignition on, it just pumped fuel everywhere. So if you're stuck by the side of the road, your bike's ground to a halt, the first thing you want to think about is how did it happen? Because that will give you a few clues as to what to look for. If you're riding along and you heard a big bang, for example, and it's dumped oil everywhere.
Yeah, you've got big problems.
Yeah, go to the nearest pub, have a drink and phone for recovery. You're not going to go anywhere. If you're gradually losing power, so you're riding along and the bike starts getting slower and slower and more sluggish and just eventually sort of rolls to a stop and dies, that's normally a fueling problem. Either you've run out of petrol, which you'll be surprised how often that happens. Look in the tank, have you got petrol? If you have, look at where it could have gone wrong. So, for example, is there a break in the fuel line? Is there a blockage? Especially on older bikes that have got fuel filters, quite often the filter can get clogged up. So, if you've got plenty of fuel in the tank, then work your way down towards the carburetor or the fuel injection system. Just follow the tank hose down. Take the hose off at the carburetor end. It's normally going to be a carburetor problem. Fuel-injected bikes tend not to have that problem. Pull the hose off at the carb end or the fuel injection end, and then see if any fuel comes out. Depending on the bike, a lot of bikes, especially scooters like Vespas, have a vacuum fuel tap. What that means is that the bike's designed to close the fuel off when you don't need the bike. So with the engine off, it will actually automatically shut the fuel off. Those vacuum taps can fail, and the vacuum hose, which is a plastic hose, a rubber hose that goes from the engine to the tap, can split or break, so you get no vacuum. If you've got no vacuum, the tap's not going to open. So what you're looking for is, have you got fuel? Great. Follow it down to the engine, to the carb, take that hose off. Have you got fuel? If there's no fuel and you've got a vacuum tap, crank the engine over. So turn the ignition on, turn the engine over. That should open the vacuum tap. If it doesn't, so you're cranking the engine over and still nothing comes out of the fuel pipe, you know exactly what your problem is. It's either a blocked filter or the vacuum tap's not working. So you now need to work back from the engine back towards the tank and see what's in the way, what's the problem. And if it's a Vespa or a bike that's got a vacuum tap, 9 times out of 10, that's going to be a problem. It is very common. So you start off with fuel, because that's the most obvious one.
Yeah.
If the bike lost all its power, so for example, you're riding along and the dash goes out, the headlights go out, and you grind to a halt, that is going to be an electrical problem. So the first place I'd look is a fuse box. Mm-hmm. Have a look, have you got any blown fuses? Very often that will be the case. You've blown a fuse, and if it's the main fuse, it will shut everything down. You'll just grind to a halt. If you've just lost part of your electrics, so you've lost your lights or your indicators, then it's going to be one of the fuses in the box. So trace through the box, try and identify which fuse controls the bit that's failed, and have a look at it. Fuses can die of old age because every time you use the bike, the fuses go through a heat cycle. The little wire that's inside the fuse heats up, cools down, and does it thousands of times over. So over time, it can literally just die of old age. And if you pull the fuse out and find that it looks a bit dusty, a bit tired, then just try putting a new fuse in. You should always have spare fuses in your fuse box. Put a spare fuse in. If that cures the problem, great, you're on your way again. If you put the new fuse in, turn the ignition on, and it immediately goes bang, then you have what's known as a catastrophic fail. So pull that blown fuse out and have a look. If it looks like there's been a mini starburst inside that fuse, so you've got little black charred bits of molten metal in there, that shows you there's an earthing fault. There's a fault to earth. So one of your power lines, one of the live wires on your bike, is probably rubbing against the frame somewhere, and it's trying to earth out the battery on that particular circuit. So if it's your headlight circuit that keeps blowing, then one of the wires going to your headlight is earthing out, is rubbing against the bike's frame and earthing out. You've got a choice. Either you accept that you're going to complete the ride without your headlight or your indicators or whatever part of the bike is not working. You take that chance. If it's blowing the main fuse, which is the fuse that controls everything on your bike, and typically that's about a 30 amp fuse, and it's next to the starter solenoid under the seat usually. If it's blowing that, then there's no point in putting another one in because it's just going to blow that one as well. And what you shouldn't do is try and put an even bigger fuse in, hoping that it won't blow the heavier fuse, because if it does, then what do you do? Put an even bigger one, put a nail in there? I mean, what do you do? We've had quite a few bikes that have come in where people have just put lumps of metal in their fuse box because the fuses keep blowing. All that happens is the bike just catches light. So your bike goes up in smoke. So not a great outcome. So if it's not fuel and it's not electrics, they all look healthy, then we're back to the very first thing I mentioned at the start of this evening, that golden triangle. So you've got fuel, you've got ignition, so all that's left is compression. And that's the least likely one to cause you a problem. Coincidentally, this is exactly what the C1 failed on. So you spent a day trying to cure the problem, but you were trying to, you can't cure that. If the bike's got no compression, there's nothing you can do by the side of the road. There's two main reasons why you'd have no compression. Either you had a big bang, as I mentioned, literally the engines blew up, or it's a worn engine. So you've got very low compression because the piston and rings and barrel have worn to the point where they're just not holding enough compression for the fuel to ignite. Because unless the fuel-air mixture is compressed quite tightly, it's not going to detonate, so you don't have that power. More commonly, you lose compression due to valve clearances. I won't get into the technicalities here, but basically the fuel and the inlet and exhaust valves are what control the fuel going in and the exhaust gases going out. Over time, they do go out of adjustment, and they are designed to open and close by a certain amount each cycle to allow fuel in and then exhaust gases out. Over time, they can wear to the point where they don't open and close correctly. And if they don't close fully, then it won't cause any compression. A bit like a bicycle pump. If you put your finger over the end and try and pump, you get lots of compression and the pump won't go all the way in. The valve's designed to open and close to let that pump go up and down. If you've got a hole in your bicycle pump, you can pump up and down as much as you like, nothing's going to happen. And that's what happens with valve clearances. And that's the most common reason why we get bikes in here with lack of compression if they're not too old and knackered. If the bike's really old with like 1 million miles on the clock, then yeah, you've probably worn it out. But if it's a relatively new bike with low compression, it's valve clearances. They are a routine check. Every major service, you are supposed to check valve clearances. Most people don't because of the cost.
And is there any way you can kind of test on the roadside for bad compression, or is that not?
You can. I mean, obviously, you need a compression tester to get an accurate reading. And the way the compression tester works is you take the spark plug out, screw the compression tester in. It looks a bit like a tyre pressure gauge.
Yeah.
And all that happens is, as you crank the engine over, after several cycles of it trying to compress the gases, it gives you a reading on the dial as to just what the compression is. If you haven't got a compression tester, the other way is crank over the engine and with the spark plug out and see if you are getting a decent volume of air blowing out of the spark plug hole. If you're not getting much out of it, you might want to guess that either you've got no compression or very little compression.
Now, is this complete misinformation, but can you put a tiny bit of oil in the spark plug hole and try that and it might work?
No, that's not misinformation at all. That is a standard test that we do for compression. So if we suspect low compression, we put our gauge on it.
Yeah.
And yeah, sure enough, if it is low compression. What the trick of putting oil into the bore, you don't put too much in, don't fill it up. You just put a thimbleful of oil in. People know what a thimble is these days?
Do you want to explain?
No, I can't even bother with explaining what thimbles are. Look it up. Google it.
I've never heard of them.
Sorry?
I've not heard of them.
You've never heard of a thimble?
No, what's that?
Well, you've obviously never done any sewing. A thimble is what people used to wear on their fingertip to push needles in while they're sewing.
Those rubber things.
Well, no, usually metal.
Metal, okay.
Yeah, because if it's a rubber, the needle's going to poke through it.
We learn something new every day.
Well, a thimbleful is a very small amount.
Yeah.
So you put a very small amount of oil into the bore through the spark plug hole. All that's going to do is isolate the problem. It doesn't cure anything. What that does is if you suspect that it's the piston rings not sealing against the barrel, then the oil fills that gap. It actually helps to seal the rings against the barrel. Do the compression test again, and if it is the rings, the compression will have gone up. You'll get a higher reading because the oil has now sealed the gap between the piston rings and the barrel. So for example, if you've got damage on the barrel, if it's scored or if it's worn, then gases leak past it. The thickness of the oil is enough to prevent that or certainly reduce it. So what happens is the compression goes up. That means you've identified the problem. You can now say fairly certain you've got a problem there, which you have, because if the compression has gone up, clearly gases were escaping past the rings. It might not be the only problem, but you've certainly identified there is a problem. If you do the same thing again, put a bit of oil in there, crank the engine over, and you don't get any increase in compression, then you know it's not the rings. So you've eliminated that problem, that as being a probable cause. Then it's almost certainly going to be the valve's not seating properly. Yeah.
Yeah. It's definitely something you don't really... It's not a nice feeling checking for compression, I suppose. So.
No, and there's not that many bikes you can do it on easily anymore. This one, nice and easy, because you can get to the spark plug hole. On bigger machines, you're going to spend all day just trying to get to the spark plugs, let alone trying to test for compression. Not something you would do by the side of the road.
No, for sure not. Cool, so we're nearly coming to the end of our time here. We've got a couple more questions. Someone's asked, how do I adjust my V-Trek clutch lever on an MT125? The lever doesn't return fully after releasing and the small adjuster is already all the way in.
Sounds like the cable might have got to the end of its adjustment. So without looking at the bike, I'd guess that you probably need a new clutch cable.
Seems quite like for a 2025 bike.
Oh, right. So yeah, you shouldn't have worn out a clutch cable in that time.
No.
So did you say V-Trek lever?
A V-Trek lever?
So it's probably got an aftermarket lever on there then. It's not the standard manufacturer's lever.
Okay.
So it's possible that there might be a problem with the lever itself.
Yeah.
Being a 25 bike, it's very unlikely the cable itself will have stretched to the point where you've run out of adjustment. So I would suspect the lever itself. If you've used up all the adjustment up here, so that if I'm understanding the question correctly, you've got an adjuster here. Let's drop this down a bit so you can see it more easily.
Nice.
You have an adjuster here. So the correct adjustment is you should have about 5 millimetres of free play, or 1/4 inch if you're old enough. So that's the correct amount of free play. And what I mean by free play is that's how much you have to move the lever before it actually starts moving the cable.
Yeah.
If you've wound that all the way out to the end of its adjustment, and it's a fairly new cable, which is it should be, then it's not correctly set up. What you need to do is go to the other end of the clutch cable, so follow it round to here, and you see there's another adjuster there. If that's been incorrectly adjusted, then you're going to run out of adjustment up that end. So what I would suggest is wind that one back in again, all the way in, and then adjust it correctly from this end to get to the correct adjustment. And then as the cable stretches and wears, then you can do the adjustment up here on the handlebar.
Yeah.
So you don't need to touch that one again.
Yeah. Yeah, that sounds like great advice. I think that's pretty much all the questions we have time for, really. I mean, Craig also asked, where would the check engine light sensor usually be? But that's quite generalised because it would be from an issue that ECU's getting, right? It
is, yeah. It very much depends on the bike. So if it's an engine management light, very often it's not on the engine at all. It's actually in the ECU.
Yeah.
Because the bike's brain is telling you there's a problem. So that's where the signal comes from. What you need to do is isolate what the bike's brain is telling you as to what's actually wrong. Because it won't just say, help, yeah, I'm not happy. It knows what the problem is. You just need to interrogate it, and it will tell you what the problem is. But the signal comes from the computer. The fault is going to be somewhere on the bike.
Yeah, absolutely. Cool. So that's everything we have time for today. So thanks everyone for coming along and watching this. So if you've got any other questions with maintenance, feel free to drop them in either the Discord, the WhatsApp, or on any of our videos, and we'll try and help you out. So thank you very much for watching, and have a good evening.
And there we are.